Yeah, someone gave that to me, and I thought to myself, I had no idea.
Now, had you sported a beard before, or is this something?
No. No, actually, I didn't. Even the first time around, I just decided it would be easier to buy one, which I did do, and then it turned into such a popular event, it seemed more work than it was worth to put it on, take it off, but instead just grow one.
Yeah.
And the older I got, of course, the very first time I got to perform Hemingway was for his 100th birthday in Ketchum, Idaho, and I had pretty dark hair, and it was hard to put all that white in there, and as time's gone by, I now have closer to his natural coloring, and I happen to be 62 years of age, same height, pretty much the same weight. So everything is a little more natural now, so I just decided to grow my own and work on presenting Hemingway for all the various Hemingway festivals that are taking place.
Are you an actor by trade? Is this your background?
It is. I've been doing this for almost 25 years, spent a stint in New York City, and at which point it all started for Hemingway. They said, you know, you need to find a one-man show. You need to find something you can do to present yourself. And I had come from Idaho, where I knew Hemingway was there, and somebody said, oh, you look like a young Hemingway. So I started research in the mid to late 90s on a project that eventually took me back to Ketchum, Idaho, Sun Valley, I discovered a play. I'd been looking for the right one. I wasn't writing one very well. And I thought, oh, well, there must be something out there. And I found a play by a gentleman named John DeGroot called Papa that did have an appearance briefly on Broadway. And it was a powerful piece. I mean, it was a look at the man that nobody really knew, that everybody's always wondering, what was he really like? So it was a day in the life at his farm, the finca in Cuba, that really looked at his entire life. And the premise was that a group of life photographers, which actually did happen, came to take pictures for his last story on Pamplona. And then this is a fictional account of what maybe happened that day. So that play was so powerful, so wonderful, I decided that was the piece to do.
Did you read a lot about Hemingway when you were a kid? Is that
You know, it's interesting. The irony is I found Hemingway, I'm sure I read Old Man and the Sea in college or somewhere, but visiting and meeting up with a group of friends in a place called Pamplona in Spain. And I really didn't want to go. Running with the bulls didn't seem to be anything I thought I'd want to do. But I had picked up James Michener's Iberia, and I'm driving there, and we all converged on this city. And a few days before the festival, sitting in the plaza, meeting people who had met Hemingway. There's the old man, there's a young man, he was young when he ran with Hemingway with the bulls. And so the story, it just kind of, I got caught up in it. And I decided that I was going to run with the bulls. And they do it for 7 days. It starts Sunday to Sunday, and I lasted 5 days before I actually was gored by a bull. And it was the day I was going to run in ahead of the bulls into the arena where they take the big photos and hang them in the square that day, that afternoon, to show who made it through the entrance to the arena. And that was, that whole experience and being gored by a bull and all of that just kind of, I went to the bullfights up to that point too, and I suddenly had an understanding of what I think Hemingway was talking about. When you see the fight for the first time, that you see actually what's going on. You're not looking at a poor animal who's defenseless. The man against the beast. It's just, and it's beautiful. It's like ballet when it's done well, and it does have a final outcome. But Hemingway himself would say, all stories, if you let them go long enough, end in death, and he is no true storyteller who would deny you that. So I've always kind of felt that I got to learn from, by experiencing that, to appreciate it, not necessarily to always accept it, but to appreciate it when it's done well. And from that point on, I ended up, ironically, in a little town called Ketchum, Idaho, following friends go skiing. And there he was, the burial place of Ernest Hemingway. And so what I found was a natural desire to do theater, to continue to do my theater, and a wonderful way to really learn about Hemingway. I met his son Jack, I've met Mariel. I've had a great opportunity with the festivals to meet scholars, to meet Valerie Hemingway, who was his son's, Gregory's wife, and at one point a secretary. So more and more and more, the information kept coming in, and this complex individual, an opportunity to really present him, made me do the research I'm doing and do the presentations. I really feel I want to do the man, not the myth, if you will.
So I will. You can read this book while you're here.
But Schulberg, sparring with Hemingway.
It's a wonderful story of how Bud Schulberg in his life paths crossed with Hemingway, and it's not a particularly favorable piece of the puzzle. They both were sort of claiming F. Scott Fitzgerald. Schulberg wrote about him. F. Scott Fitzgerald, of course, Hemingway felt very close to F. Scott Fitzgerald. So it was this kind of little bit of push and shove where they actually met each other. And literally there was pushing and shoving. And Hemingway was looking for Schulberg. He'd never met Schulberg, but I had read his stuff and felt Schulberg was somewhat of a fraud on the world of boxing. He didn't know his boxing, and Hemingway did. So in fact, what happened was he met in the kitchen, and they went through this process. They went through this process of Hemingway testing. Testing.
I'm still a 12-rounder. Yeah.
Testing Schulberg, and Schulberg knew all these idiosyncrasies because he goes back to the 30s and 40s and all this other stuff. So they literally went through this process of testing each other, and every time Hemingway would want to make a point, you don't know about Pinky Mitchell, you don't know about Leo Hostad, how, boom, 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 and he came back, till finally Schulberg says, I do know about it, you don't know your stuff, it was one of these sparrings, and then they sort of created a long distance audio for the telephones relationship. So it's the funniest thing.
I'll have to read that.
Yeah,
that's another good story. Yeah, Hemingway and boxing. I mean, I always felt I'm left-handed, so whenever I do anything, I have to remember to change my position here. But he prided himself on his ability and worked at it. But I think there was in the man fear was a great motivator in his life. And whether he was as rugged as his myth image, I'm not so sure of. But he made sure he could protect himself and always wanted to challenge someone because he felt that was an area he was a little more expertise than others. And I would say probably 50-50, depending on who he stepped in the ring with. Yeah. He came out okay. But to me, the biggest experience, the thing that defined his life was the war. His first experience in World War I as an ambulance driver. And that's what I use to base this whole sense of this character. Not a need to be macho, but a need to, an understanding that at any given moment you face, it's a life and death situation. Yeah.
Well, this might be a good segue to kind of go into character.
This could be.
Yeah. Let's create a scene. Let's say it's 1959. Let's probably get it. Was he in Cuba then?
59. He was in Ketchum, Idaho.
So let's figure out a time where he's in Cuba.
1960. The fall of 1960.
Okay, let's pretend it's yep, there it is. Fall of 1960, just to set the scene. We're having an opportunity, I'm from the States, to do an Edward R. Murrow type This Is Your Life, and with Ernest Hemingway, and to talk a little bit about Ernest Hemingway at the Finca, is it Villa?
Villa.
Villa is a state outside Havana, Cuba. So with that in mind, welcome Ernest Hemingway.
It's my pleasure to be here and to have you here at the Finca. You know, it was my third wife, Martha Gellhorn, who found this wonderful place. Doomed from the start we were, but we still have the Finca.
Now, Martha Gellhorn, you had a chance, when did you have a chance to meet her?
I met Martha in Key West. She was a journalist, a young, attractive woman, and she came up to me in a bar and introduced herself. And
what did she introduce herself as?
she said she was a journalist doing a story. I don't remember on what now. I think I got lost in her eyes at the time, and double daiquiris, frozen, no sugar, thank you.
Did she get lost in your eyes?
I thought she did. She seemed to convince me she did. It was only after we married that I found out it probably wasn't quite that way for her. She did not want to live in my shadow, nor did I want to live in hers.
Let's go back a little bit. You were born when?
I was born July 21st, 1899 in Oak Park, Illinois.
What did your mother and dad do?
My mother, Grace, not that she had any, she was a teacher. She taught students piano. She was a singer of opera. That she thought she had a possible career. And my father was a doctor. He delivered thousands of babies.
Your mother had aspirations for you. What field of interest would she have liked you to have been in?
My mother tried to get me to play the cello. Took me out of school for a while. It didn't work. She would have liked anything other than a writer. She was not happy with that. She probably would have liked me to go into the church. My father, on the other hand, who was a great man and a great hunter, taught me about the world of hunting and the wilderness. And
Therefore, your father was an athlete. Did you feel like you had to please him?
you know, I don't like talking about my family. If I had written about them, I would have answered questions about them. Mm-hmm. But let me say this about my father. He didn't have a chance with my mother. No, I never thought I had to live up to his expectations. But he was a great role model, and he was a great shot, and he was a good hunter, and he was a good doctor. So there was a lot to live up to.
As were you, a great shot, a good hunter, and quite the athlete. How did you get inspired about the other thing that you're most known for is your writing? What drove you to that?
I always wanted to write. And I loved shooting. Wow. Shooting is faster than baseball. You're out on one strike. Mm-hmm. But writing is what I always wanted to do. And from my first job at the Star in Kansas City, where I learned to write a simple declarative sentence that's useful to anyone, it was a way of being able to tell the stories inside me. And I knew that if I continued on a daily basis that I could write. That was what I was meant to do, to write one true sentence, to take the truth and make it more true than it really was.
Interesting to me is one of your early pseudonyms was an individual that you paid tribute to, a sports writer in the form of Ring Lardner Jr. Do you know why you did that?
It escapes me now. I don't know why.
You had this, during that time period of your life, you also had this wanderlust to perhaps get in the Army. Why would you want to get involved in the Army during a period of time of a global turmoil, yet here we were, the United States was pretty much isolated and then not necessarily involved?
You have to understand that in my world, Teddy Roosevelt was my hero. I wanted to be Pawnee Bill, Indian Scout. Those men represented what was good in life and what life should be about, the challenge of a victory over your enemy. It seemed clear to me that that was the choice I needed to make. I decided to see and experience it, because that's writing: to look, to listen, to learn, to understand, and then to create it again, more true than it actually was.
When you found yourself on the Italian front, what were some of the experiences that you feel like shaped you?
Amazing to think back now. It was the first experience in a completely different language. It was sight, sound, smells, foods, women, all new in my life, things I had not experienced. I was 18 years old, and that was the first time death tried to count me out. Damn near did too. July 9th, 1918, and we're camped out along the Piave River, close by Fossalta, a small town in northern Italy. I will never forget the sound of that shell. It was like a great beast ripping a path through the sky, and it left me open-mouthed and breathless, unable to breathe. That experience was an experience that shaped my life.
You had a close encounter with death, but you also saw death through the eyes of a reporter. You were first-hand experiences where, I read someplace about the fact that there was an ammunition dump that exploded, and there were people and remains, and you covered it. And when you see that firsthand, what's that do for you, for your psyche, your soul?
No war, no matter how justified, is not a crime. And I know war. I know war better than most men now living. And it has always been, to me, deplorable. And its destructiveness to both foe and friend has rendered it useless as a means of settling an international dispute. Scarred for life, that's what people say. Well, how could you not be? I couldn't sleep. I never liked the dark after that, and I never forgot what I saw. But I learned that that's what life was.
When you left and the armistice occurred and you returned back to the States, you ended up back in the Chicago area. What was it like living during the Prohibition?
It was a tough time, but those years as a reporter, I learned to see, to write what I saw, what I heard, and to tell just the simple truth of the situation. It was where I met Sherwood Anderson, who inspired me to take my new wife, Hadley, and go to Paris if I wanted to write. That's where everyone was that was doing any of the great writing of that period. And he gave me letters of introduction to the great Gertrude Stein and Ford Madox Ford, and that was my inspiration to go and focus on my writing.
Through that relationship with Gertrude Stein, you got a chance to meet some very interesting people who, it's been written up subsequently, were referred to as the lost generation. Who was involved in that group of people?
La génération perdue. Thank you, Gertrude. We were all veterans of that first great war. We were young. We seemed, in her eyes, without focus, without desire, without ambition, without ability to follow through. She thought of us as having been lost through that war. I think I was found through that war. And F. Scott Fitzgerald exemplified that. Ezra Pound, the great James Joyce. We were all there. We all went through that. I think it did change us, but we weren't lost.
You once wrote that Ezra Pound was right half the time, and when he was so wrong, you were never in any doubt about it, and Gertrude Stein was always right.
I didn't write that, did I really?
You did.
I find it hard to believe I would say Gertie was right all the time. She once called my short story, Up in Michigan, inaccrochable, not attainable, because like a painting, you couldn't hang it on a wall. Well, proved her wrong with that story, didn't I? Mm-hmm. And I think Ezra Pound, although he was a great poet, was not as great a poet as Dante. He taught me to never use adjectives. They say the seeds of what we will do are in all of us. But it always seemed to me that in those who make jokes in life, the seeds are covered with better dirt and a higher grade of manure.
You felt pretty strongly towards Gertrude Stein, and in fact, you asked her to be the godmother of one of your boys.
Bumby. Mm-hmm. Bumby, our first child.
Yes.
We were friends for a long time, Gert and I. And it's hard to believe now, but she was a damn pleasant woman. It was Alice who got rid of me. She didn't like me. Ha! But there was... Well, I don't wish to talk about Gertrude's parting.
Shortly thereafter, probably the departure, you had a chance to meet a young, aspiring author named F. Scott Fitzgerald. He'd written The Great Gatsby. How did you find him? How did you meet him, and what did you think of him?
Scotty. When he finally gave me the manuscript to The Great Gatsby, I realized that for all his shortcomings, for his inability to deal with alcohol, anyone who could write as great a novel as The Great Gatsby would surely write another great novel. And that was before I met Zelda. But his work was incredible. And we were friends. And he did help me and inspire me. And I was very fortunate to have him in my life.
How did he do that? How did he inspire you?
He had the ability, probably the most important part was through his writing. I was inspired through his writing. I never liked anyone to look at my writing until it was completely done, my way. Scotty always wanted to help, and he did help in many ways, but he was not always right. But I think I felt inspired because he was in the fast track and had published so much more before me, and so I wanted to keep up.
Zelda and you didn't see eye to eye often.
No, I never trusted her. I thought she led Scotty down the wrong path. I followed for a while too. It didn't help me. It was fiesta every day, it was party every day, and I think she was jealous. Jealous of Scotty's fame. She always seemed to want to pull him away from his writing. I think that's what kept him from writing more until she was finally committed.
After she was committed, did you have any connection with Scott?
I saw him. I saw him enough to know that he was lonely, he was upset, and he drank too much. And it stopped him from writing a lot more. but it told me that I had to be careful of the same problem, always wanting to have fun and be in the center of things with all the great parties.
When it came to religion, how was your sense of your relationship to a God?
For my second wife, Pauline, I converted to Catholicism. I think I'm a Catholic. I don't put much faith in the idea of a being out there. What I do know is that life is what has to be lived, and it will give you a curveball just when you're looking for that fastball, and you have to deal with it. That's what it is. And the good is what one has faith in and one works towards. And the bad, when it comes, you try not to let it ruin you.
When the bad come, and sometimes in your various novels there were critics, the Max Eastmans, even F. Scott Fitzgerald Scott had some comments, among others, including Gertrude. How did you deal with that?
Critics and scholars are the eunuchs of literature. They're all virtuous and sterile, well-meaning and high-minded, but they have a habit of hanging attributes on you, and when they find you're not that way, accusing you of sailing under false colors. That's how I handle them. Ignore them.
About 1931, a good friend of yours, John Dos Passos, came up with an idea, a suggestion, a change in geography, which led you to move to a place in Florida, little known, called Key West. Why there?
Well, the simple truth is that my wife, Pauline's grandfather, had purchased this house for us, and she felt it would be a great place for us to raise family, and I could write. And that's why we got there. I can't say it was a bad place to write. I did enjoy it for a while. But no, wasn't my favorite place.
What did you write during that time period? Do you recall some of the inspired works that came from that period?
In the early years, I started Farewell to Arms and finished it in Montana, To Have and Have Not, as I believe, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Many of the short stories are beginnings of them. The Sun Also Rises had beginnings, but they all had beginnings in various places, Paris, maybe in Piggott, Kansas, or Key West, or some of it at the Finca, or in Spain. I wrote every day. I kept a count of how many words I wrote each day. To write one true sentence takes work. And as soon as you get that, then the work begins.
You mentioned Spain, and again, John Dos Passos is in Spain during the late 30s, and not that you necessarily followed him, but you happened to be at the same place at the same time. What drew you to the Civil War?
It was my belief in the people that they were fighting, what they were fighting for was just, and that they needed the support. The famous fifth column that I wrote about in a play, actually. But I felt that Franco was wrong, and that party should not take away the Spain of the people. That was it, simply. What I learned from that experience is to stay away from politics. There is no justification in politics. It isn't about right or wrong. It's about the party and the politician.
At that time, you had a chance to also work with a guy named Herbert Matthews, who we know recently has curried favor with the new Generalissimo Fidel Castro. What's your reflections on Herb Matthews?
Well, Herb, the time I spent a little bit in Cuba with Castro, remember that was my home, and it was taken away from me. That's why I have no fond regard for Fidel. But and Herbert Matthews, time with him escapes me too at this point. Remind me.
Herbert Matthews, you both wrote in Spain together. He was a colleague of yours who would be well known for his favorable reports on the new Generalissimo Castro. And he's had a bias towards the Republican side, just like you. Was it that time when you were seeing the atrocities that were occurred to people that you really started questioning your religion?
It happened the first time.
Yep.
It happened in Italy. I never questioned after that. I saw that it made no difference. Was I to believe that it was a God who saved me and let the Italian next to me die? Was I to believe that war was God's instrument? There was no more for me to examine. Life, the deck of cards, the hand you're dealt, it is what it is. And it's how you live it that's important.
Was part of that living also included your involvement in World War II, where you were not only a reporter, but you were a participant?
They exaggerate. There's no proof that I fought in that war. At least not any concrete proof. WW2, Ernie Hemingstein, I used to call myself, war correspondent. I had a chance to fly on bombing missions in flak so thick you could walk on it. It never changed. It didn't get any easier, let's put it that way.
Did you ever feel the shadow of the head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, over your life? Did you suspect that he was looking at you and wondering what you were doing?
You have now reached an area where what I say may offend the nuns and kiddies, especially with J. Edgar Hoover. I have no fond words, nothing nice to say about him, and yes, he did tap my phone. End of story. That's because of what I was doing in Cuba, you understand. Helping is what I thought I was doing, but J. Edgar, oh no.
You looked south from Key West towards Cuba. Why? What drew you to the island?
I went fishing. I loved to fish. My third wife, Martha, and I found Havana. It was quite the exciting place. So raw, so earthy, and it was so close. And that's why we went.
As a fisherman, there was certainly that inspired a book which gave you great acclaim. Acclaim perhaps you thought was deserving a long time ago, but sort of eluded you. The Old Man in the Sea brought much to you. Was it expected? Was it received correctly?
No writer who ever won the damn Swedish thing ever wrote anything worth reading after that. Of course I wanted recognition. Of course I was happy that they acknowledged Old Man in the Sea. It is a great story. but I felt I was cursed. The sad truth of it is I didn't want to go to Sweden to get the prize. I wanted to be left alone. I got the acknowledgement, and that was it.
You have references to baseball in that book.
Mm-hmm.
Were you a baseball fan?
I loved baseball. Baseball is a great sport. It's one that's exciting to watch, and it's one full of great statistics. I liked numbers that you can deal with to create the image of what's going on. And it is the sport of America. As a sports writer in my early years, it was the reason that I got involved. And it was a wonderful way to earmark, to pinpoint historical moments and events by using great sports characters, Joe DiMaggio, Babe Ruth. It put the people reading my books in a truth that was true.
Was the timing of the fact that Joe DiMaggio had retired in 1951, did that have a reason why he may have found a little more favor in your book?
Perhaps. That's just talk. I don't believe so, no.
Your desire for wanderlust, for excitement, for living outside the normal orthodoxies was part of your charm, and also has resulted in a variety of incidents in your life which have caused you injury and near-death experiences. Can you kind of comment on a couple of those?
2 full-blown plane crashes, a number of car wrecks, and 3 wives. And I lived through it all. That's true. I should have slept more. My life had a tendency to fall apart when I was awake, you know.
You're in Havana. What is it that you see around you in the 50s, which was governed by Fulgencio Batista, that caused or inspired you to take the next level of your artistic life?
It's interesting. I looked at everything. I remember an old couple as we used to drive from the finca down into Havana who lived in a shack just on the outskirts. Nothing. 3 walls, no door. Just an open shack, and they would sit all day in filth and carry garbage back and forth. It was not for me to judge that as wrong as much as to understand it. That's how I did life. That's how I wrote. Understand it. Not my job to judge. That's the tip of the iceberg. Let the reader make decisions. So I did that in everywhere I went, except when the cruelty. And I was for Castro. I wanted him to take Batista out, but I don't know that it made a big difference.
So here we are, your encouragement of Castro, it's now real. We're on the first days of his leadership. Do you fear that things are starting to change and perhaps not rolling out the way you would have liked?
Exactly. Not at all the way I would have liked. It was suggested that we leave until things settled down. I was prepared to stay, but with Mary and our new home and Ketchum to go and stories to finish, I decided to leave. I regret that. I would have fought. But I didn't have that opportunity.
Here we are, 1959 going on 1960, and if I was asked for you to reflect on your 60 years, what would be the legacy of that you would want other people to write about you?
I would like them to say, remember, I wanted to run as a writer, not as a man who's been to wars, not as a barroom brawler, not as a horse better, not as a drinker. I just wanted to be a writer.
As we conclude our interview today with the great Ernest Hemingway, and it's been a thrill for us to be able to talk to you here, is there one last message you would like to leave for the viewing audience?
I'd like them all to remember to have fun. That's the key. To work hard, to work every day, and to have fun. And to look, to learn, to see, to understand life, and not to judge it. And the icing is have fun. Vaya con Dios, if you have one.
To Ernest Hemingway, we thank you.
My pleasure.
Terrific. Party. And there's a guy named Ernest Hemingway there. And you start talking about boxing. What happened there?
Well, but it was like the first time I met Hemingway. It was in Key West.
Okay.
I did know. I did meet him at the Scribe Hotel in Paris during the war. Was just saying hello. But my trouble with him was in Key West. A mutual friend of ours, Toby Bruce, sort of his secretary, Man Friday, and a very good friend of mine was giving a party for Ernest. And I was out in a little patio having a drink there. First, and he was in shorts, not shorts exactly. It looked like blue jeans that had been ripped apart. He was wearing the upper part of it. And he came staggering toward me and he sort of poked me. It was not very nice. He said, "You're Schulberg?" And I said, "Yeah, yes." And he said, "You're the book writer?" And I didn't like it. I said, "Yeah, I've written a few books." And the next thing he said was, "Well, what the hell do you know about boxing, for Christ's sweet sake?" And he ran me down a list of famous fighters, one after another, famous middleweights. And at the beginning, I answered him as quietly as I could. Yes, he great middleweight from Philadelphia, this, that. And each time I answered one, he would poke me, not exactly punch me, but shove me very hard in the shoulder. And I'd have to take a step back. And after about 5 of these names thrown at me, he said, Pinky Mitchell. That's what he'd do, just name a name, Pinky Mitchell, and he shoved me. And I took a deep breath and I said, well, Pinky Mitchell was, junior middleweight champion of the world, and the brother of Richie Mitchell who had the great fight with Benny Leonard, and he came out to fight our fighter. We thought of him like that, Moshe Callahan, who in spite of his name was a local Jewish heavyweight, welterweight, Morris Shearer. And I said, in that fight, Moshe won, and won the title. And he was a friend of our family. And Moshe gave me the gloves that he won with, and I had them on a wall over my bed. Instead of finally saying, well, I guess you did know him and know something about boxing, he went right on. He pushed me harder and said, and balked at me. He said, he didn't react to that at all. he said, Pete Latzo. Just yelled it at me like a, and shoved me against the wall. He's an unbelievable bully. And so I tried to be patient. And I said, Pete Latzo. I said, Ernest, I don't think you realize this, but every one of these fighters is like a Hall of Fame fighter. These are all Leo Lomsky, these are famous fighters here. And Pete Latzo beat Mickey Walker, a famous fighter from Scranton, Pennsylvania. Excellent fighter, and he said after he retired, he went back to Scranton and is now an organizer for the Teamsters Union. And then I pushed him a little, not as hard as he pushed me, I pushed him a little bit. And I said, and if you're so interested in Pete Latzo, why don't you go up and see him? And he wheeled and walked away and went back in the house. And I was leaning against the wall, until I remember, leaned against the wall, seething. I said, God, this great writer, this great man, behaving like an idiot, really. And Toby was little, Toby, he came back with a Bloody Mary for me, and he said, Papa's in the kitchen, and Papa says he likes you. And I said, Toby, you go back and tell Papa that I admire him very much, but from now on I plan to admire him from as far away as I can get. That was pretty much, the Hemingway stories go on, but that's just one of many.
In 1954, Ernest Hemingway was given the Nobel Prize for Literature for his novel, The Old Man and the Sea. Still recuperating from 2 plane crashes in Africa, he was unable to attend the ceremony, and his acceptance speech was read by the ambassador to Sweden. Here is a portion of that speech recorded later by Ernest Hemingway.
No writer who knows the great writers who did not receive the prize can accept it other than with humility. There is no need to list these writers. Everyone here may make his own list according to his knowledge and his conscience. It would be impossible for me to ask the ambassador of my country to read a speech in which a writer said all of the things which are in his heart. Things may not be immediately discernible in what a man writes, and in this sometimes he is fortunate. But eventually they are quite clear, and by these and the degree of alchemy that he possesses, he will endure or be forgotten. Writing at its best is a lonely life. Organizations for writers palliate the writer's loneliness, but I doubt if they improve his writing. He grows in public stature as he sheds his loneliness, and often his work deteriorates. For he does his work alone, and if he is a good enough writer, he must face eternity, or the lack of it, each day. For a true writer, each book should be a new beginning, where he tries again for something that is beyond attainment. He should always try for something that has never been done, or that others have tried and failed. Then, sometimes, with good luck, he will succeed. How simple the writing of literature would be if it were only necessary to write in another way what has been well written.
It is because we have had such great writers in the past that a writer is driven far out past where he can go, out to where no one can help him. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ernest Hemingway. As you have just heard, I have no facility for speech writing and no command of oratory, and I never should have recorded anything. I would like to thank the Jackson Center for the honor and privilege of appearing here tonight. But contrary to popular rumor, this is my first visit to the Jamestown area. I thank you in advance for your patience. Speaking French, à votre santé. They thought I was through after across the river and into the trees. But I guess the old man proved them wrong. Name me one writer who won the damn Ig Nobel Prize and did not end up cursed. My apologies to the nuns and kiddies for the use of any offensive language. But alas, all our words from loose using have lost their edge. I don't mind talking at night, because I never work at night. There's a lot of difference between night thinking and day thinking. Night thinking is usually nothing. The work you do at night, you always will have to do over again the next day anyhow. Doctors reduced me to 2 glasses of wine a day. Never said nothing about vodka. Most of Old Man in the Sea was written at the, speaking Spanish, Finca Villa, or Lookout Mountain, just outside Havana, Cuba. Cuba was always a good place to write. So was Key West in the cool months, and the ranch in Cook City, Montana. Some places were not as good, but perhaps we were not so good when we were in them. No one place was ever better than Paris, France. In the early years, when we were very young and very happy. If you are lucky enough to have lived in Paris as a young man, then wherever you go for the rest of your life, it stays with you. For Paris is a movable feast. My first wife, Hadley, and I arrived in Paris in 1921 with letters of introduction to Gertrude Stein and Ezra Pound from the noted writer Sherwood Anderson. Learned from him, but it didn't last long. Better? Hadley. I never should have left her, my Kit Kat, my Hadley. She gave me my first typewriter, Smith Corona model number 3 from wife number 1. Light years ago, that was. Paris. Back when you could still believe in horses that went off at 20 to 1. There was no quarter too poor to have at least one racing paper. It was gambling, but we called it racing. To write one true sentence, that was my dream. To take the truth and make it more true than it really was. We lived in this cold water flat over a sawmill at 113 Rue Notre-Dame-des-Champs. We were always hungry. No heat. Come winter, we would lie beneath a great goose down comforter and play the secret game that we had invented. But that's another story. Every morning, I would leave my Hadley in the warmth of our bed, taking a few centimes for coffee in a cafe with a quiet corner table where I could write. The Closerie des Lilas was the nearest good cafe, and it was one of the best cafes in Paris. It was very warm in the winter, and in the spring and fall, it was very fine outside at the tables under the shade of the trees on the side where the statue of Marshal Ney was, and the square, regular tables under the big awnings along the boulevard. beer was very cold and wonderful to drink, and the, speaking French, pommes à l'huile were firm, marinated, and the olive oil was delicious. I ground fresh pepper over the potatoes and moistened my bread in the olive oil. On a bien mangé, speaking French. The Closerie des Lilas had once been a cafe where poets met more or less regularly. The last principal poet was Paul Fort, whom I had never read. But the only poet I ever saw was Blaise Cendrars, with his golden boxer face and his pinned-up empty sleeve, rolling a cigarette with his one good hand. He was always a good companion until he drank too much. And at that time, when he was lying, he was more interesting than many men telling a story truly. Just like Jules Passin, who looked more like a Broadway character in the 90s than the lovely painter that he was. He hanged himself. They say the seeds of what we will do are in us all. And it has always seemed to me that in those who make jokes in life, the seeds are covered with better soil and a higher grade of manure. It was in that room over the sawmill that I learned not to think about what I was writing about. From the moment I stopped writing until I started again the next day. I always wrote until I had done something. And I always stopped when I knew what was going to happen next. That way you could be sure of going on the next day. That way your subconscious would be thinking about it, while you would be talking to other people, noticing everything, I hoped, and learning, I hoped. And I would read, so that I would not think about what I was working on and make myself impotent to do it. But sometimes, when I was starting a story and I could not get it going, I would sit in front of the fireplace and squeeze the peel of little oranges into the edge of the flame and watch the sputter of blue that they made. I would look out over the roofs of Paris, and I would think, do not worry. You have always written before, and you will write now. All you have to do is write one true sentence. Write the truest sentence that you know. So finally, I would write one true sentence and go on from there. The great thing is to last, to get your work done, and to see and hear and learn and understand, and write when you have something that you know about, and not before, and not too damn much after. Going down the stairs when I had worked well, and that required luck as well as discipline. It was a wonderful feeling that I was free to walk anywhere in Paris, having no money. I would go off and spend the afternoon in a museum, savoring the painting instead of a meal. It was old Gert Stein who taught me how to look at a painting and see the pure essence of it. Feel the dry Spanish heat in a landscape by Miro. I wanted to paint. I wanted to write like Cézanne painted. I remember one good one. At the Luxembourg, the house through the trees. One tree with a house beyond. Not the big lake one, no. The other lake one. Dans la vallée de l'Oise. Studying Monsieur Cézanne taught me how to compress my words, so that what you read was the tip of a great iceberg of buried feeling. My theory is that you can omit anything as long as you know that you omitted it, and that the omitted part would strengthen the story and make people feel more than they understood. If a writer is writing truly enough, the reader will have those feelings as strongly as if the writer had stated them. Knowledge is what makes the underwater part of the iceberg. The dignity of movement of an iceberg is due to only 1/8 of it being above water. A writer who omits things because he does not know them only makes hollow places in his writing. I still believe it is very bad for a writer to talk about how and what he writes. He writes to be read by the eye, and no explanations or dissertations should be necessary. You can be sure that there is more there than can be read in any first reading. And having made this, it is not the writer's province to run guided tours through the more difficult country of his works. Gertrude Stein, she lived at 27 Rue de Fleurus. My wife and I had loved the big studio with the great paintings. It was like one of the best rooms in one of the finest museums, except there was a fireplace, and it was warm and comfortable, and they gave you good things to eat, and tea, and natural distilled liqueurs made from purple plums, yellow plums, or wild raspberries. Miss Stein was a big woman, but not tall. She was heavily built. And she reminded me of a northern Italian peasant woman with her clothes and her mobile face and her dark, lovely immigrant hair, which she wore put up, as she had probably worn it in college. She talked a lot, all the time. And at first it was about people and places. And then she asked to see some of the stories I had written, and she said that she liked them. All except one, up in Michigan. It's good, she said. That's not the problem. But it is, speaking French, inaccrochable. That means, she continued, that it's like a painting that a painter paints, only he cannot hang it in a show because no one will buy it. Critics and scholars are the eunuchs of literature. They're all virtuous and sterile. Well, meaning and high-minded, but they're all just camp followers. They have a habit of hanging attributes on you, and when they find you're not that way, accusing you, sailing under false colors. In those days, many people went to the cafes at the Boulevard Montparnasse and Boulevard Raspail to be seen publicly. And in a way, such places, they anticipated the columnist as the daily substitutes for immortality. Not the Lilas. Oh, it was a pleasant cafe, clean, friendly, and quiet. Many mornings, I would hang up my old waterproof and weathered felt hat and order a café au lait. My blue-backed notebooks, the 2 pencils, and the pencil sharpener. A pocket knife was too wasteful. and the smell of early morning, sweeping out, the mopping, and luck were all you needed. For luck, you carried a horse chestnut and a rabbit's foot in your pocket. In those days, you didn't really need anything, not even the rabbit's foot, but it was good to feel it in your pocket. I would take out a book and a pencil and start writing. I was writing about up in Michigan. And since it was a wild, cold, blowing day, it was that sort of day in my story. I had already seen the end of fall in boyhood, youth, and young manhood. And in one place you could write about it better than in another. Well, that was called transplanting, I thought. And it could be as necessary with people as with other growing things. It was when Hadley and I had returned from Canada, and Miss Stein and I were good friends, that she made that remark about speaking French. Une génération perdue. All you young people who were in the war are a lost generation. You have no respect for anything. You drink yourselves to death. Hell, we were dealt aces and eights and lived. I was only 18. First time death tried to count me out. She damn near did, too. The First World War in Italy. July 9, 1918. I'm just out of high school. Can't wait to get into the big game. We're spread out along the Piave River, close by Fossalta, a small town in northern Italy. It's a hot, moonless night, but you could still see the river flowing mirror flat in the sudden brilliance of an exploding star shell. They say you never hear the sound of the shell that's going to kill you. I did. Like some great beast ripping a path through the air. And then she hits white hot like the sun gone mad, hammering down on me, leaving me open-mouthed and helpless, no longer able to breathe, no longer there. And I feel myself rising up, out of my body, away. But it's not my time. And then I feel myself drifting back down into my body, and I know I'm alive from the pain. There's an Italian soldier on the ground next to me, his body glistening from his wounds. I pick him up, and then this Austrian machine gun nails me in the right knee, but I keep going. I make it back to the medical station where this doctor starts working on the boy I dragged in, while this old priest starts reading me the last rites. Christ, the thing of it is, while the old priest is praying like hell to get me to heaven, the boy I tried to save shits his pants and dies. Every man's life ends the same way. It is only the details and how he lived and how he died that distinguish one man from another. All great stories have continued long enough and in death, and he is no true storyteller who will keep that from you. I know war as few other men know it, and nothing to me is more revolting. I have long advocated its complete abolition, as its destructiveness on friend and foe has rendered it useless as a means of settling an international dispute. No weapon can settle a moral problem. It can impose a solution, but it cannot guarantee it to be a just one. The old giant killer, which I discovered in that Italian hospital where they hacked over 200 hunks of shrapnel out of my leg. Also fell in love for the first time with my nurse. Very prosaic, no? Her name was Agnes von Karowski. She was an older woman, tall and dark and wise. And she would come to me when I awoke, sweat-soaked and screaming in the blackness. And her hands were so cool and soothing. Her voice was so warm. She was filled with such a sweet, perfumed warmth, so that one night, when my fear was very bad, my Agnes took me in her arms, and we made love. I asked her to marry me. She said yes. But then reality sets in, and she dumps me for an older guy, an officer in the Italian army. Well, sure, in my farewell to arms, the boy soldier gets shot to shit and falls in love with his nurse. Only in my story, she loves him truly. Loves him and marries him, promises to follow him anywhere, does not dump him for an older guy, loves him truly, gets pregnant and dies giving birth to his child. Sic transit Agnes. And if I did happen to think of Agnes with another man, I would cauterize the wound, writing my stories. In the First War, all I did mostly was hear guys talk, especially in hospital and convalescing. Their experiences became more vivid than your own. You invent from your own and from all of theirs. I invented every word and every incident in A Farewell to Arms, except possibly 3 or 4 incidents. Well, all the good part is invented. From things that have happened, and from things as they exist, and from all those things you know, and all those that you cannot know, you create something. You make something out of your invention that is not a representation, but a whole new thing, truer than anything true and alive. And you make it alive. And if you make it well, you give it immortality. That is why you write, and for no other reason that you know of. I want to run as a writer, not as a man who's been to war, nor as a barroom fighter, nor a shooter, nor a horse player, nor a drinker. I would like to be a straight writer and judged as such. In the 3 or 4 years that we were friends, I cannot ever remember Gertrude Stein speaking well of another writer who had not written well of her own writing or done something to enhance her career, except Scott Fitzgerald. I learned a lot from her before she went haywire. You'd never believe it now, and there is no evidence to prove it, but she was a damn pleasant woman. Alice was jealous. Alice be tokeless. I heard she told a friend, I made Gertrude get rid of him. She did too. Women. I grew up in a house overflowing with the female gender. Totally outmanned and outgunned by my 4 sisters and dear mama. Couldn't navigate the backyard for all the female unmentionables billowing in the wind on wash day. My mother used to pretend that my oldest sister Marceline and I were twins. Twin girls. Used to dress me up as one in these pretty little things. Had to go around with my hair up in curls. Calls me her little Dutch dolly. Hell, I wanted to be Pawnee Bill, Indian Scout. Of course, I knew what she was up to. My mother, Grace, not that she had any. Show you. 3 stories and 10 poems, my first book. Boy author mails his book all the way from Paris, France, to Oak Park, Illinois, with its wide lawns and narrow mines. Filth. That's what the boy author's father called his book. Filth that has no place in a decent Christian home. And it is truly a great family tragedy that you should have survived death in a war where so many decent, God-fearing young men died. Survived death to come home, only to squander it all in a life of decadence, filth, and pornography. Of course, I knew it was her. She told him what to say. Papa never had a prayer. There was no money for books. I borrowed books by Turgenev, Dostoevsky, Stendhal, and Joyce. In those days, when words we knew were barred to us, and we had to fight for a single word, it was the influence of Joyce's works that changed everything and made it possible for us to break away from the restrictions. You know, I'm responsible for smuggling Ulysses into the United States. True gent. Many, many fine books from the rental library of Shakespeare and Company. The bookstore and library of Sylvia Beach at 12 Rue de l'Odéon. Sylvia Beach was kind, cheerful, and interested. And she loved to tell jokes and gossip. No one I ever knew was nicer to me. Ezra Pound was always a good friend. And he was always doing things for people. His studio, where he lived with his wife Dorothy, on the Rue Notre-Dame des Champs, was as poor as the studio of Gertrude Stein was rich. His own writing, when he would hit it right, it was so perfect. And he was so sincere in his mistakes, and so enamored of his errors, and so kind to people, that I always thought of him as a sort of saint. He was also irascible, but so perhaps have been many saints. Ezra Pound, no matter what he thought, was not as great a poet as Dante, but he was a very great poet for all his errors. He taught me to distrust adjectives. Scotty. F. Scott Fitzgerald was a man then who looked like a boy with a face somewhere between handsome and pretty. His talent was as natural as the pattern that was made by the dust on a butterfly's wing. At one time he understood it no more than the butterfly did. And he did not know when it was bruised or marred. Later he became conscious of his damaged wings. And of their construction. And he learned to think. And he could not fly anymore because the love of flight was gone. And he could only remember when it had been effortless. One morning he brought his new book over for me to read. It had a garish dust jacket. And I remember being embarrassed by it. The violence, the bad taste, the slippery look of it. When I had finished reading it, I knew that no matter what Scott did, nor how he behaved, I must know that it was a sickness. And do anything I could to help him, and try to be a good friend. If he could write a book as fine as The Great Gatsby, then I knew he could write an even better one. I did not know Zelda yet, so I did not know the terrible obstacles that he had to face. All good books are alike, in that they are more true than if they really happened. And after you are finished reading one, you will have the feeling that all those things happened to you. And afterwards, why they belong to you. The good and the bad. The ecstasy, the remorse and the sorrow. The people and the places. And how the weather was. Writer's writing truly enough. All those things are yours. I know now there is no one true thing. It is all true. And what we are supposed to do when we are at our best is make it all up. But make it up so truly that later on it will happen that way. There was never any ending to Paris. The memory of each person who had lived in it differs from that of any other. We would always return to it, no matter who we were or how it was changed. How difficult, or with what ease we could reach it. Paris was worth it. You received return for whatever you brought to it. But that is how Paris is and was in the early years, when we were very poor and very happy. I have spoken too long for a writer. A writer should write what he has to say and not speak it. Besides, I'm empty. Go with God if you have one. Adieu. I will come back to Jamestown. I have no idea. What did I do? Where did I go wrong? I have no idea.
This is this isn't the. There are a number of similar pictures. This is the AP one that my dad got the hell of this.
I think it's for him and for his people.